here's a frame of reference in the world. Do you want to be a value creator or value extractor? My goal is to try and value create. There's unlimited opportunity in the world. And then number three, my other credo is that if somebody's stuck, you need to give them a hand. If somebody's down on their uppers, you need to give them a hand.
Welcome to What Gets Measured, a NinjaCat podcast about marketing, performance management, metrics, and effectiveness. Because what gets measured gets managed. I'm your host, Jake Sanders.
Colin Lewis is a CMO, columnist, educator, and investor working with a wide variety of brands and businesses across the globe, helping them understand and apply marketing fundamentals that get results and generate revenue. He's a multiple award-winning MBA qualified marketer. He also drives F1 sports cars, and today he's here to talk about advertising, AI, and where we're headed. Colin, thanks for being here.
Thank you for inviting me, albeit I would have to say I don't drive Formula One cars, but I am available for that job if somebody comes and requests that. They're a little bit smaller, they're a little bit cheaper, and they're a little bit slower, but I am available should Lewis Hamilton get the boot out of McLaren, out of Mercedes, and, you know, they're stuck.
Yeah, exactly. So, keep him in your Rolodex. Colin is available. Well, thank you. You are a second timer here on What Gets Measured. Thank you for coming back. But one of our most downloaded episodes is yours. And it was about future-proofing your marketing career. And I figured we're in this weird era, transitory period of AI. And there's a lot of promises. There's a lot of hype. And I just wanted to talk to you about how we can kind of mix this together. But I figured we'll start with B2B advertising, because that, aside from AI, is already like the discourse on how B2B is different than B2C, and like there's like the principles are disconnected from the reality, and I'm just kind of wondering where you think the disconnect in between the discourse and the reality is coming from, and what do you think the true state of B2B marketing is today? And we'll just start there and then we'll get going.
Super. Well, it's a great place to start. Let me start with a story. So one of the things, my side hustle has always been, if you will, doing a lot of teaching and workshops. Even when I was in a full-time job, I would still do workshops in the evening and so on. It's something I've been doing for 15 years. One particular day about 5 or 6 years ago, and I was actually CMO of a B2B technology company at the time. And the local marketing institute said, "Hey, Colin, will you run a B2B marketing program?" And I was like, "Yeah, I can possibly go wrong with that." And, you know, put together a few slides, you know, drew from some of my experience having worked in B2B marketing for about a third of my career, mainly in technology. Okay?
Right.
And I'm standing at the front of the class, and I do the usual, you know, my name's Colin Lewis, and I'm a great person, all wonderful. So can everybody introduce themselves? And so the first person to introduce themselves, you know, so person number one says, you know, and there's 20 people in the class. I work for, say, PricewaterhouseCoopers, PwC, and I'm like the head of marketing. Great. Professional services. Cool. The next person talks, and it's like the equivalent of, say, industrial cleaning for hospitals. I'm like, okay. Then the next person does software. Then the next person works for the state electricity board. Then the next person works for a small startup B2B business. And the next person is running like sells ingredients into another business. And this went on for about 10 minutes, to my horror, because then I realized that every single person has completely different challenges in B2B that are different by industry, different by scale, different by budget, and different by experience. Now, you might say, well, that's a bit obvious, Colin. Well, maybe. Well, let me just explain that in a little more detail. If you and I were talking about, say, CPG manufacturing, CPG goods,
right?
We have, I can say, you know, Jake, well, we've got product X here, and product X here gets delivered into a retailer. And as I know from my sort of main gig, is like the model is the same pretty much in every country. If I said, well, I'm working in banking, the model will be pretty much the same in every country. And so as we go through these consumer verticals, we can make some pretty much, we'll call it 80-20 rule, that a lot of it's kind of the same. However, marketing director for PwC might have some connections with, say, the marketing director for one of the inner magic circle legal firms, but it has no connection to a contract catering firm operating in one small city in Minnesota.
Right.
But they're all B2B. They also have no connection with what Salesforce is doing versus, the Jacob Sanders, startup about to solve the problems of the universe.
Right.
And so it's really at the core of the challenge with B2B marketing. It's not like the things are transferable. And so my beef with a lot of the B2B advertising stuff that's out there at the moment, it's actually for a very specific, unique type of company, which is a company who already has product market fit, who's already in the market, typically software or technology driven, and has vast resources. And one little kind of interesting point within that, which is much of the product is downloadable or usable in the same way across the globe. So I can be in Colombia, or I can be in Ireland, or I can be in Australia, and I still interact with Salesforce kind of the same way. I still interact with, say, Oracle kind of the same way. The product is kind of identical. Yeah. The licensing model is kind of identical. However, contract cleaning is very different in Sydney compared to San Francisco. The ownership structure is different. The budget is different. And so these rules are not comparable. They are, and part of the reason I say this is that if we're going to make generalizations, we need to stop making generalizations and need to be saying, in this context, in this specific situation, this is a really good, interesting model to look at. But the thing is, in B2B, there's 1,000 of those, and that's what makes it really complex.
Well, and I'm just speaking from my marketing heart, is that, boy, I would love to have some generalizations. You say, well, 20% of people who do 60% of the stuff get 80% of the results, and that's just the way it goes. And you're like, I love that, because then you could just sell more and get more people on board. But then maybe you do reduce the complexity of your promise and your solution in the front end, and saying anybody can come in here and get what they need. But you're going to, once you onboard them and get them going, you're going to be now seeing a lot of those distinct dependabilities, those non-transferable things, is saying, you're over here doing real estate. This person's over here selling software. This person, just like what you were saying, this person works for PricewaterhouseCoopers. It's not that there aren't places where we can conceptualize the goals in a kind of generalized way, but you're gonna have to get into the details to really make something work. And I mean, I could just see.
You just take your cue there. We just mentioned tech and software.
Yeah.
B2B SaaS is actually, apples and oranges different from B2B enterprise sales. So let me give you an example. So I worked for an enterprise sales business. We were selling software that cost $1 million plus, maybe. It took 2.5 years, sometimes 4 years to sell in. It took 6 months. It was RFP driven. One of the RFPs, in this case, it was for an airline piece of technology. I have the Lufthansa RFP here. It's 300 pages long. Yep. And I would regard myself as having a good bit of expertise. I didn't understand a word of it. But that's very different to a B2B software model where I can download everything on the internet the whole time. Yeah. One is one customer, in Germany. Let's take the airline business. There's actually 700 airlines in the world, over 1 million passengers. Really, of the ones that you're interested in, there's really about 200. Yeah. And if you're selling technology, it's around digital e-commerce, selling online, that's really 7 people. So there's 1,400 people in the globe, not like in the country, in the globe. Yeah. And so do you know how you win with B2B marketing, those guys? Email and conference. Yeah. No ads. Yeah. And the thing is, when we talk about like this is great B2B marketing, no, it's an ad that typically is for a B2B SaaS company or something that has a global distribution. And so a SaaS model is quite interesting. If you got scale, then you can do this kind of global thing. You can advertise on Formula One, yeah.
Right.
But there's one, yeah. Whereas us, like the business was quite a good business and it was had decent scale, but we were only targeting 1,400 people, and it is amazing, even in software, the amount of companies who are really targeting somewhere between 5 and 10,000 people in the world.
Thought log.
That's so, I mean, if you spend any time in account-based marketing, you know what he's saying is so true. You're like, well, I love, and this gets to this next question is that there's this gap in between academic theories on marketing practices and the real world applications. I think you just outlined a very specific example on how that gap comes to be. And then if you're not prepared to kind of adjust your thinking, because a lot of people are saying, I want to be the Disney, Coke, Apple of our thing. And you're like, well, you only have 500 potential clients. Like, the reason why Coke works is because they have Coke umbrellas, Coke bar mats, Coke buttons, Coke syrup, like you want that.
The silly gag about Coke is, so Jake, who's Coca-Cola's competition? Water, and what's the target market? Everybody with a mouth. Yeah, it's like it's just it kind of doesn't matter, But I mean, I want to be kind of positive about this. So the couple of points on B2B that I think are magic and transformative over the last 15 years. So back in the day, basically the B2B marketing was running the golf outing and the annual, shindig, if you had it, okay? And that was it. You were the guys who put the logo on the golf ball. Guys and gals who put the logo on the golf ball.
Right.
Now we have moved to where obviously the internet enables you to follow through from initial kind of awareness right to where possible, particularly on B2B SaaS, to where there's a conversion into a sale. And that's magic. That has literally created a brand new industry and a new opportunity and a new sort of way of thinking. And that is actually kind of recent. It's kind of like, let's call it 15 years old, maybe since Web 2.0 came in the mid 2000s. Probably really took off properly over the last 10 years while LinkedIn took off. And, so it's wonderful because that we are having this discussion, because 20 years ago we didn't. We were the golf guys, and so on. So it is amazing, and it's dynamic, and robbing ideas from, B2C into B2B is absolutely the way to go. But generalizations are not the way to go, because we have a long way to go before we have playbooks that work in 20 different industries.
And it's the oft mentioned answer that every smart marketer gives is it depends. Because everybody wants the sure thing. Everybody wants the silver bullet. We're out here trying to kill werewolves. You know what I mean? Like, tell me when the full moon is happening so I can get my gun ready. And you're like, well, it depends. And I think it's not satisfying, but I like that the onus of deeply understanding the market, the people, the participants, that ends up being a strength where, I just think maybe people are, I mean, do you think that maybe getting a deep understanding of your customers is maybe the best way to sell to those people? Or like, how do you do that? You just hit them.
There's two sets. See, this is the mad bit about B2B that nobody will actually say till those who have actually done it go and say it. Particularly, say, in software, but it's also applicable in professional services and many others, which is in the consumer game, if you will, our market is the shopper and the retailer who's buying the product. And it's kind of narrowed, but it's kind of an amorphous amount of, people out there who, but we don't kind of meet them per se.
Right.
But within the organization and most B2B businesses, there are, in some cases, quite powerful salespeople. And the revenue number is driven by the salesperson, or in professional services, driven by the rainmaker within who's the partner or head partner.
Right.
And they've got a lot of political power.
Right.
And when they see a marketing role, they typically see it as more of a comms role, if you will. And what's happened with the advance of technology has enabled us to actually measure our marketing efforts. And that measure is leads. That measure is leads. And so within that framework, this is why it's great to be a B2B marketer today, is because we have a measure, which is, are we delivering marketing qualified leads? Are we delivering sales qualified leads? And yes, of course, we can talk about that till the cows come home. But the principle is we've got an absolute measure that can kind of work in many situations. And that is actually probably more accountable than a lot of consumer stuff. But that creates its own dynamic, which is you better be more robust. Anybody B2B marketers I talk to say you better be pretty robust as an individual, because you're going to take a beating pretty much every quarter or every year from your salesperson. So give you an example. Every year, I used to do my marketing plans around November, December, and I would invite in the head of sales, the chief revenue officer, and then each individual account manager. And it was essentially, confessing to the Pope for my sins. All I did was get a beating the whole time. And the summary of that beating was, you didn't drive enough quality leads. And every person who works in B2B marketing knows those words.
Yeah.
And so within a role of B2B marketing, you can talk all you like about building a brand, and it's great, but you better deliver the leads. And you could say leads are no. Within the politics of these businesses, the marketing person is driving leads, and that's their connection to revenue. Yeah. And that is like a kind of key platform within these B2B roles. You just better be ready for the beating up that occurs. And so that's why I talk about you talked about the theoretical versus the street.
Right.
Well, the street says you better deliver leads. And you, as the marketing director, may compromise what the perfect role of what you should do with your brand in order to deliver leads, because the pragmatic decision is to do so is driven by the fact that you need to keep your job, because the job description includes lead generation.
I mean, it's just, you're speaking directly to people's hearts, and it can be tougher. I mean, what you said was the difference between B2B SaaS and enterprise stuff, services, is like night and day. I can just turn on this B2B SaaS. I can go online, access it from anywhere. Enterprise, we're talking, what'd you say, like 2 years?
But, 2 years, and maybe if we were looking in our case, it's really 1,400 people in the globe.
Well, and then that's where that theory of get awareness, create recall. You're like, that is sounding like a great thing. But you don't, when you're asked to deliver qualified leads, in a consistent fashion, and you're out here kind of doing like a song and dance on the side of the road. I'm not saying that that's not good. You can get some attention, but that doesn't directly connect with the reportable stuff that you're going to be asked to in that November, December meeting, because they're going to be like, well, where's the leads?
I can give you, one case study is not the sort of peer reviewed test of everything.
Sure.
But we managed with the revenue for this particular company was 16.4 million euros in this case in 2016, and by the time I left by the end of 2019, I didn't leave for a couple of years after, it was 29.4 million. And what did we do that was different from the previous thing? We did 3 things. We were obsessive about our email list. We were obsessive about creating amazing conferences, and we were obsessive about creating amazing content. And that was it. Nothing else. The numbers there,
And if for people, this is an audio podcast, but behind Colin is 12, 24 books, all saying the word strategy on them. And I think what he just outlined was strategy isn't all these things you're about to do. It's getting a laser tight list of what you ain't going to do. And that is like more important, because yes, you could do all those things, and it might actually be a good idea to do a golf sponsorship. That's not off the
Maybe.
table. But you got to really drill into what are they expecting? Okay, now how can I get there? What's the most easiest way to get? But then you said something that's cool, getting obsessive about that stuff. I think a lot of us, and this goes into this next question about AI, is this new thing comes along and you're like, okay, we got to do this. We got to bring it in. The VCs are looking, they're going to look, and they want to know that we have AI doing all the stuff. But you have to fold that into your obsession, and knowing what you are going to, your obsession is going to give you fruit. It's going to be a fruitful obsession, not like an obsession where you're boiling rabbits in your ex's kitchen. I don't know what that is. That's the movie Fatal Attraction.
It's a reference to 1980s movies there.
Wow. But I like this idea of being obsessed. And I think a lot of us we need to keep a light hand on strategy, because there could be a new tactic that comes in that could completely change our strategy. So considering the rapid advancements in AI, what specific impacts do you foresee, these things having on marketing strategy?
Well, one thing I want to frame for your listeners is that there's elements that we can draw before. There's sort of there's little models for us to kind of think through. So the way I'm kind of see this is like Web 1.0, which is kind of a standard phrase. Web 1.0 is when we kind of like did this kind of initial discovery of the whole thing around whatever 93 up to around say 2004 2005, because then Web 2.0 was a completely different paradigm, which was like social media driven.
Right.
And then now you could argue we're in a kind of a third phase post-pandemic of and post-launch of AI, where we're now getting into a sort of third phase. And the first thing for your listeners is that initial phase of Web 1.0, when I was a lot younger than I am right now, was met with a lot of like, this is not relevant to our business. This won't work. And sure, it can't do this. And that was really quite specific. Okay. Now, I was lucky for one period I got to work for a company that was quoted in the NASDAQ, and I kind of had an insider view of how they were using tech. I remember saying, hey, everybody, look at this kind of cool stuff. They're using email, they're using e-commerce. Isn't this amazing? And every single CPG company said to me, well, we'll never hire you because that stuff is not relevant to our business. Now we're here, obviously, we're the best part of 15, 20 years later, it's relevant to everybody's business. Web 2.0, social media, Facebook, YouTube, 2006, 2010, that's not relevant to our business. Then suddenly it's relevant to our business. So we have a lag. And the difference with the AI lag is that we didn't have 5G and we didn't have all ubiquitous access to smartphones. Yeah. And so that lag is much shorter than Internet 1.0 and Internet 2.0. And the lag is catching up on us much faster. And then originally Internet 1 was around, content websites, little bit of e-commerce, obviously Amazon. Internet 2 was kind of a little more visual with images and connecting us all through social media and YouTube and so on. Now, and you could still say it was kind of a narrow set of use cases, if you will. It wasn't the legal firm in the 90s, one particular famous book about the impact of AI in professional services, written about 10 years ago by Daniel Susskind, Richard Susskind.
Yes.
He was told by the legal, what are they called, the law society in the UK, that he was bringing law into disrepute by suggesting that people would be emailing contracts rather than faxing in the future. 1993. It's a great quote in his book. It's really something that kind of struck to me, that the legal firms are like, that will never happen. And then, of course, 5 years later, they're sending attachments over like anybody else.
Oh, yeah, they are.
And so when you hear this, like, this will never happen, it's not relevant. It's just that we've been down this road before, but the unique thing is that this is now available with 5G. ubiquitous broadband and on our phone. And that is like a first ever. So that's why we're all kind of like, how should I think about this? This is kind of struggling. And the other bit is that now, as marketers, we're kind of always at the forefront of the stuff that impacts us, anything that's visual, anything that's a
We're all
distribution.
over it.
We're all over it, yeah. But now they're coming. First, they came for the marketers. Now they're going for the accountants, and then they're going for the lawyers. Yeah.
Oh.
And so it's the first time ever. It's like what I call a horizontal play rather than a vertical play. So it's horizontal, hitting a lot of industries. Now, then let's deconstruct that. Jake and I had this conversation just before we started. All organizations, by definition, are interested in two things. They're interested in revenue increases and cost reductions. And if we look at AI through that lens, it's like, where does it deliver proper revenue increases or cost reductions? Now, cost reductions can be something as dramatic as headcount reduction,
right?
To, I've just shortened the time to go and do this thing that used to take me 5 days.
Right.
And I can get to the market much faster, which helps revenue as well. And so this is the sort of horizontal thing that's happening there. And I would encourage your listeners to kind of see the world through that lens, not as good or bad. It's just that we've seen this kind of before. It's just now happening quite fast, and there's a lot more PR about it. Then we have to stop and consider, what does that mean to me, the individual, and how does that pertain to my company?
It also makes me think the pace of adoption, because of the ubiquity of the internet and access to such things, and just today, as of the recording date, ChatGPT can be used by anyone. You don't have to log in. You can just pop in there, which is once again showing that this pace of adoption is being shortened because of access. But then also I'm wondering, I am old enough to remember when I was talking to people and they were like, I don't need a website, And I was like, you know what? You might actually not need a website. But now everybody needs a website. Does everybody need a website? Everybody needs to be on social media. I'm not saying that you shouldn't, but do you? Because there are plenty of people that are very successful without it. But I think this AI thing is like, we need it. I think you can have it. But do you think that also with this shortened window of adoption, we're going to see a shorter window of what's good and what's bad? Like, I think you're going to see very soon who is going to benefit the most from it, who doesn't really need to play around with it. Whereas websites, it took a long time to figure out if you needed a website. And we'd be like, you know what? Let's do it. Let's make a website, and you're like, yay. But 10 years later,
build that website, Jake. Remember, like back in even 15 years ago, the tools to build that website prior to WordPress or prior to Wix or anything like that, it was an absolute pain in the ass.
You're so right. I mean, Webflow right now, it's like, it is so easy. But yeah, it was not. You needed to know someone who built websites. What a quaint world we used to live in.
I'm sure we touched on this in our very first podcast, and listeners, you should go back and listen to that podcast.
Yes.
But one of the things I do in one of my workshops, there's two stories here that I think the listeners might like. One is, 15, 20 years ago when Jake and I were trying to build e-commerce sites or whatever a client may want. We had to go, right, okay, e-commerce is made up of this thing, and you need a shopping cart, and you need this, and then you need a catalog, and then you need to do this, and then you need a user interface, and that's got to be good, but that's different person, skill-based design to do this. And eventually, then you just said, you know what, I'm not selling online. And then up from Shopify, and Shopify is a catalog, is a shopping cart, is a thing with images, and it's all there, and it's $30 a month. Yeah,
turnkey.
So the tools sometimes come later, and it's just at the time you're like, oh, this thing is never going to work, and then you see Shopify and you go, hey, everybody can sell online. So what happens is democratization of tools happens with a lag. Now the crazy bit with ChatGPT in particular is it was everybody knew about AI from the 1950s. It's been around, but what it didn't have, what's called a user interface moment. And the user interface of that browser where I can sign in and ask a question, that's the magic. Yeah. Where, say, when for instance, when Twitter came out initially, it goes, tell us what you want to do. And you're like, I don't know what I want to do.
Yeah. What's up? I think was one of their, what's going on?
I'll take a picture of my dinner. Okay, great. Yeah. And whereas with ChatGPT, it was like, it gives you the prompts, and then you do it and you try it and you go, right. And then this kind of iterative process. So we've got the user interface moment that happened with ChatGPT. So if we just then move one step up beyond that, then the more they improve the user interface moments, the more democratized it gets. Because if you just said there, if I can just use it on my phone, as I know somebody's doing right now, I heard last week, they're talking into their ChatGPT on the phone when they get an idea when they're out and about, and it translates it into a blog post or into a thing. Yeah, that's a user interface moment that kind of shortens the time between idea and capturing that idea. And the way for us all to think about this, and it's something I read in 2017, and I kind of went, yeah, this is now my model of the future, which is the window of opportunity will open much faster, and the window of opportunity could close even faster. So let's just say, to create a few sort of like thorny issues for our listeners. Something like, say, I don't know, radio takes 20, 30 years to be adopted universally. TV takes, because there's all these other things you got to do to make TV working.
Right.
Smartphones, 2G, no use. 3G, a little bit better. 4G, pretty good. 5G happens, mass adoption. Okay,
Right.
great. So the window of opportunity stays open a lot. Well, what happens to something like, say, crypto, where there is like a window initially, it opens and then it collapses again. And then maybe there's another window open and then it collapses again.
Right.
What if, say, and I'm making things up here, but let's say NFT, okay, which I have no interest, I don't care. Just look at it as an example of the window opened and the window closed. Yeah. And what we're going to see over the next while is a lot of windows opening, but we won't know whether they'll close. Or we can make bets. It's kind of like, what's that, a book or a bet, thinking in bets? Are you thinking in where I'm playing roulette, where it either lands on red or it doesn't? Or am I thinking in poker, where I can play a hand and make it work for me, even if I've got a hand that isn't a royal flush?
Yeah.
And because we don't know windows opening and closing, we're going to be playing poker and probability rather than roulette.
Well, and that kind of echoes what you were talking about, that horizontal play. Kind of thinking on a larger time frame, but that also just needs to kind of like center around your strategy, what you're actually looking for. I mean, do you think there's a danger that people are going to stick their heads out of every freaking open window? Like how do you, what's your advice for keeping people like on? Like, hey, I want you to introduce this stuff, but like fold it in. Like, don't, you want to make the brownies that you make. Like I read something about comparative advantage and competitive advantage. And it was about AI. And it was like, if everyone has AI, then it isn't really a competitive advantage. But if you use it in the way that only you can, then it creates a comparative advantage. And that is something that you can really like make hay with. I mean, riff on that. What do you think about that?
That speaks to this idea of commoditization. And let's use commoditization of a product and then of the individual to kind of help people frame their own thinking on this. So we know, obviously, if things are kind of launched faster, it's quite hard to keep a competitive advantage. It's quite hard to have any form of differentiation and in many cases distinction, because I can copy much faster. I can have a product that is an email marketing tool, and then I can go into GitHub, get a copy of that and do a different version and have it at a tenth of the price. So The forces of capitalism, if you will, always mean that there's somebody nibbling at your your competitive advantage.
Right.
And AI will just drive that kind of idea down. But let's just look at some use cases, even myself, that I did in the last couple of weeks. The first kind of frame I want to say to everybody is I'm forcing myself to keep an open mind. Because like all the listeners of your podcast, my career and my role and my kind of way of creating value in the world is deeply affected by artificial intelligence. So I work with retailers and I work with brands and I help them and I advise them. I also do content, if you will, in many respects. I also do a lot of training and teaching, and particularly I work with startups for one aspect of what I do. Now, all of those are radically changed by the role of artificial intelligence
Mhm.
because we can do, well, you could jettison me, you could do it yourself, you can do all these things. But let's actually just give you an exact use case of what happened over the last couple of weeks. So I've been running a series of in-person workshops with a bunch of startups. In fact, I've run 6 in 8 days. So it was pretty intense.
Yeah.
And one of the things prior to this year, when I would run these series of workshops, I would talk a lot about how here's how to position your brand, and here's what you can do for your content, and here's what you can do. And I never kind of felt I landed it. And
Hmm.
I had this brainwave because remember at my opening statement, I've forced myself to be open in terms of my perspective. And rather than go and say, no, I understand that, Jake. I'm like, no. What if you didn't? What if, So in the middle, well, towards the end of the day in one of these, every single workshop, they were getting into positioning and they were trying to think through content and they were looking at their go-to-market. And I said, okay. And I picked probably the best idea in the class because a lot of them were very early stage startups. And I said, right, okay, so you're making, you want to make widgets and these are particular type of widgets. So why don't we go into ChatGPT and actually ask it to help us create your positioning? So I went into ChatGPT on the screen in front of them and said, you're an expert in widget manufacturing, you're an expert in widget marketing, but you're struggling with your positioning. Give us a few positionings that won't. Oh, and here's a framework of positioning, and I used April Dunford's positioning
Oh
framework
yeah, she's
in
great.
there, yeah, and she's amazing. And I said, using this framework, what would you say? Now, of course, the first answer was kind of a bit all over the place, and it wasn't quite there. But one or two of the bullets that came through were amazing. And I said, okay, well, tell me more about number 6, or tell me more about number 5. Then it gave me more detail. And I was like, great. Okay, I want you to now create the front page of the homepage of a website from that, and it will come up with an answer. And I said, "Oh, give me 3 answers." So we went from I have no idea how to position this brand, this startup, to a feel of how it could look on a homepage, and a feel of whether these words could work. And so I was working kind of like with the person, but also with this other person at my shoulder who could think about this faster. Now, I have some exact experience of this because the last couple of years, I used to sit and metaphorically cry into my metaphorical pint every time I had one of these meetings, going, I've no idea what I'm going to say.
Pull the hair out, the
Pull the
real
hair
the
out.
real hair.
Yeah, pull the real hair and be crying. And then I was like, well, hold on a second. I'm getting what I call good enough answers. And we can tell the turkeys pretty quickly. The person, the group understands it. Their level of understanding what they need to do was amazing. And I said, well, create a few LinkedIn posts on the fly. And they were like, oh, okay, I see it. So we went from nothing to understanding content and its role, understanding the role of the website, understanding how we could bring these positionings to light. And we did that in 5 minutes.
Well, you're kind of like that. That is ballsy to me because I think Colin would say, "Oh, you're paying for Colin, okay? You're not paying for Chat GPT, so I'm not going to use. But you use it to show them
Yeah.
how. And very interesting though, there is this nexus of you prompting, you using your experience and your comparative advantages to then make this tech work for everybody, why people wouldn't do that because they don't want to be replaced. Like if somebody's like, well, I'm not going to go to Colin's thing anymore because he just showed me how to chat GPT my way to be just as brilliant as him. What's your thought?
Well, here's a frame of reference in the world. Do you want to be a value creator or value extractor? I'm like, my goal is to try and value create. There's unlimited opportunity in the world. And then number three, my other credo is that if somebody's stuck, you need to give them a hand. If somebody's down on their uppers, you need to give them a hand. Particularly because I've been down on my uppers myself a few times before, and I've struggled with a lot of this as well. And I've been in dire straits financially, back in the day. And so my kind of MO in the world is, can I create value for other people? Can I help them get out of their way of current thinking and bring them to a new level of thinking? And if they run off and do with it and inverted commas, steal my ideas, whatever, I'm great. No problem. No problem at all. Great, because that's enough of a mark that hopefully and value I created for them. I never see it in that. I literally never walk around the world going, I can't believe that guy Jake Sanders rubbed my idea. He's a disgrace. Because there is an unlimited well of ideas, and I can give you in the next 10 minutes 1,000 ideas. Once I have my little buddy ChatGPT beside me if I wanted to. Or if I don't have ChatGPT beside me, I can turn around and look at the books behind me and pick up another 1,000 ideas. Ideas are unlimited.
Ideas are unlimited. And I also came across this fact is there is a limit to compute. This is another thing. You mean computing power? Why? I don't like people using the word compute. But anyway, we have the compute. You're like, you also don't have grammar, but disregard it. But there is a limit to chips, to ones and zeros. There is no limit to people. There is no limit. Like you can think of it that way, and you can prompt your way into something, but there's something about then bouncing it off of somebody who's in a completely different vertical, bouncing it off of someone who doesn't even know what you're talking about, and saying, well, this person doesn't get it. Well, then it's not tight enough, or you're really drilling in some kind of, and we'll get to the jazz thing soon, but you're really, really technical proficient, stuff like that. And then you go and play a show. Nobody likes it because nobody is here to see technical proficiency. They're here to feel something. And there is unlimited feelings out there. So it does create this sense of the false dichotomy of like, it's going to take everything. And you're like, what did it take? And are you telling me that there wasn't endless, boundless creativity already? Like, it's not going to go away. Like, I love that thought.
I think it comes from a very restricted view of what creativity is. If you're a kind of a completely sad person like me and you odd time engage in fights on the internet, I rail against people saying, but creativity. The word drives me bananas. Okay, because it's seen like in the Venetian Empire, they had this thing called the Libra d'Oro, and you had to be part of the Libra d'Oro to get the right gigs and get picked. You had to be selected, and everybody else was outside of that. It's kind of like Formula One today. You can't get a Formula One team together because they won't accept you in. It's called the closed shop. Yeah, we all know what a closed shop is. Yeah,
hello.
So people use the word creativity as a veil, as a sort of metaphor for a closed shop. Only I can be creative. Only I, the high priest and priestess of creativity. You, however, you little peasants out there, you cannot be creative like me. Yeah, and I rail against that. Yeah, because creativity comes in lots of different ways. Creative obviously is the incredible stuff you do, Jake, playing the piano and in the moment being creative. Creative is I'll blow my own trumpet. Me talking to somebody an hour before our call who's doing this incredible piece of ingredients technology to enable food ingredients to be both repurposed, recycled, and help create organic food ingredients. Coming up with an angle for that using ChatGPT, helping them unpack their thinking and getting them to drive their own capabilities. That was creative.
Yeah.
And they loved it.
Yeah.
As Hot Chocolate would say,
Everyone's
a winner, baby.
Shout out to hot chocolate. Well, let's transition using that creative, instance to transition into this thing. You mentioned that you wanted to talk to me about jazz transcription,
Yeah.
which we'll define.
Yep.
Which is basically listening to a solo, which is basically a spontaneous composition, and then writing it down or learning how to play. And before there was paper, this is how people learned language. This is how people learned songs, history, and music. So transcription is this thing, but you wanted to talk about Clark Terry and his approach and what that kind of creative process teaches us and maybe can inform our use of AI in marketing. And I mean, you just mentioned the creative application and exploration of these things, but how does this help us get to more productive outcomes? And then let's riff on jazz transcription.
Well, part of the reason for our listeners is I wanted to talk about this because Jake is an amazing musician, and essentially this is all a front for me to be insanely jealous and hate on Jake because he can play the piano beautifully, and I am. The word hack would be the wrong word because that would actually assume that there's a level of skill and capability in my piano playing. But I love the idea of it.
Yes.
So I love it. And so one of the things over the years I've had to. I've played 3 or 4 times. I've gone and got jazz lessons and so on. And probably lesson number 2 in jazz lessons is you learn about this thing called the jazz standards. Like they're just standards. There's about 500 of them or so, Jake, if I'm right.
Yeah.
Or Great American Songbook, if you want to say that.
Right.
And you kind of have to know all of these songs.
Yes.
And you've got to know all these songs off the top of your head. You got to be like, Jake's there. You say, Colin, we're playing all the things you are. 1, 2, 3, and you're in. Or 1, 2, 3, 4 in that context, and you're in. And you're like, wow, you've got to have this like vast repertoire of knowledge. And when I looked at and the second part of that is, how do you learn to improvise? Well, they do this thing called transcription, as Jake described it. But the transcription is brutal, I'd like to point out. Yeah.
Brutal.
So you say, you take, say, a solo from Miles Davis on Kind of Blue, which is the largest selling jazz album ever. And the first song is called So What? The second song is called Freddie Freeloader.
Yeah.
And you can buy the actual transcription, but no, the jazz teacher will smash you across the head for doing that. You've got to write it out yourself on notation and then learn how to play it. I mean, it's tough. By the way, that's just on 2 songs. I mentioned So What and Freddie Freeloader. You've got to do that for every one of the major of the American of jazz standards,
right?
And by multiple players. So you got to know it by Miles, you got to know it by Coleman Hawkins, you got to know it by whomever.
Yeah.
And it struck me that this is all kind of like a metaphor for artificial intelligence for marketers. And let me explain for that very long-winded thing. So what is an AI model? It's drawing from different words, deciding, in many cases, say a word-driven AI model. It's drawing from a command, an idea, a piece of music, and then saying, okay, it said this, therefore this would be the next thing, and this logical would be the next thing. And obviously, I'm butchering something incredibly intelligent or incredibly technical, but the principle is like that in jazz as well. And in jazz, what we do is, if I'm playing an F sharp, well, there's a certain, and I'm playing it in a certain key, well, then there's a logical progression of what I will play next.
Right.
Now, so that's kind of like the first thing, which is like, if I just see it as this great combinatorial capability that enables me to get to where I want to go. So that's the first kind of point.
Right.
But then at a much higher level, there's a great jazz player called Clark Terry. And Clark Terry basically has been part of his whole sort of approach to the world was he loved teaching, like most jazz musicians, they love teaching. And his frame was this. So to learn first, you've got to imitate. First, you imitate. In other words, you take all the jazz standards and you imitate the solo by Miles Davis. You imitate the solo by Coleman Hawkins. You imitate the solo by Charlie Parker, if you can. Then you, by doing so, that assimilates the knowledge, assimilates what they're doing, and you feel what they're doing. And by doing this imitation and then this assimilation, then you can innovate. And it's only through imitation and assimilating their ideas can you actually then innovate. When I hear people talk about creativity or innovation, it sounds like it kind of, in many respects, people talk like as though it comes out of thin air. But what I'm being, yeah, it's this thing. It's the magic. The muse came to me, and what I would say that all these greats, not just in jazz, but David Bowie, writers, everything, they copied their favorite artists to see even how they wrote the words.
Yeah.
And the freedom that will give. There's an incredible book by an amazing strategist out of London called Mark Earls. That he's written,
Yes.
Copy, and Steal Like an Artist by Austin Kleon. If your listeners buy those and listen to get and intrinsically embed those ideas in their mind, they will never see AI as a threat because they'll see it what it is, which is an imitation model and a combinatorial model. Because what's happening when you imitate Clark Terry you imitate, say, Miles, but you'll also rob an idea over here from, say, that Bill Evans did on the same solo. You'll also rob a thing that you saw Oscar Peterson do. And it's this combinatorial capability that will mean that you can be innovative all the time, every time, and AI won't matter.
Yeah, it won't. I mean, but you're talking about a really interesting thing, and it made me think of so many different ways that I've approached, because you hear jazz and you're like blown away. If you really, really dig into it and you say, all right, they're playing the head, which is like the most known part of the song. And then they start playing with things. And but when you can whistle back what they're doing. I remember Ron Miles talking to me in a lesson once, and he was like, if I can't sing back your ideas, your solo, it's not good. And I was like, oh, what? Well, I'm hitting all these notes. This is a Charlie Parker lick. I'm doing this diminished return. I'm doing this thing. I'm hitting this 2-5-1 change. Like, no. What you need to do is build it up from the bottom. So listen, feel the flavors of these people. And then what I did, what helped me, was goal note method. It was, I forget who created it, but it was in this thing. It was like, here's the chords. You want to hit the 3, and then that goes to the 7, and then that goes to the 3, and then that goes to the 5. These are the notes. Just play them. Whole note. Now, piece together how you might approach into this and approach over this and connect the bar. And so you start adding in more things. And then you're kind of actually like structurally building your approach to creativity, back ending it with an approach that you've heard. And what we were talking about before we recorded was like All the Things You Are, Autumn Leaves. Well, Autumn Leaves has been played by Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, Bill Evans, McCoy Tyner, John Coltrane, all of these people. And in each instance, they did the same song, but they did something different with it. So, you're saying, well, I don't want to sound like anybody else. And you're like, tell me this new music you're playing through a didgeridoo that has like valves on it. And also no one's going to understand what it is. The Chapman stick is this instrument. It's like a fretless bass cello thing. Right. All the weirdest people play this because they're like, isn't this dope? Like, look at me. And I was like, no one has a reference for it, so they don't get it. Guitar has reference. You mean Eddie Van Halen? You mean like there's a guitar magazine? Like there is no saxophone magazine. There's no Chapman Stick magazine. It might be a pamphlet or a newsletter. Talk about a person who needs a website. Those folks. But I think there's something about the roundabout way that you do get to innovation is a combination of structures, internal models, reasoning, understanding, then really kind of computing, what is required. Like, I need to hit the 3, I need to hit the 7. And it's all of that coming together. And then over time, working it. Now you have freedom to approach your solo in a way where somebody could whistle it back to you. And you're actually doing something that's just as good as the song. You're spontaneously composing. And that's when you're really hitting on all cylinders. And I appreciate all the nice things you're saying to me, but oh my God, there was nothing more hectic and scary for me than going to jam sessions. Because the other part is people are kind of dicks at jam sessions. They're like, oh, you don't know how to play? Well, then you don't know. And I was like, that's not true, man. I can move a crowd. I can do those things. And I don't need to know all these songs. I need to appreciate where they come from. What are great examples of them done very at a high level? Why are they like that? Can you explain to me why you don't like opera? Can you explain to me why you don't like country? Can you explain to me why you don't like jazz? Because if you can, well, then you've put some thought into it. But once again, maybe that's that horizontal thinking that you're approaching in jazz that can be transferable to strategies, to content creation, to conference, presentations, like to conversations in between people. Because right now, me and Colin, I gave him a couple questions, but all of this is freestyle. All of this is improv. Everything we do is improv. Everything you do is creative and innovative. So don't shortchange yourself, and don't think that you're going to do something brand new without stealing a little bit of flavor from everywhere.
Well, it's tied in with that. We're talking about some pretty highfalutin stuff, and we're talking about some of the greatest artists who ever lived.
Yeah.
And I want to land it for our audience as well, is that, we don't have to be, Miles Davis or whoever. We don't have to create the greatest 30-second ad ever. We don't have to create the greatest radio ad. We have to create something that's functional and that works. And all our careers, and it's actually not whether you're a marketing person or not, you could be an accountant, listen to this, you will be doing work that is good enough. Yeah. And what I wanted to get across to people that, unlike, say, well, even actually, if you're Miles Davis, not every single night was like the greatest night that he ever played live.
Mm-mm.
Not every night, Bon Jovi, who did you mention?
Van Halen.
They will get off the stage and go, that was an okay gig. It wasn't like my best ever. So we're in the game of doing, we'll call it, I'll just label it as good enough. But you know what I'm saying when I say good enough. I don't mean throw it out the door.
Yeah, that'll do.
Yeah, it's the best within the time, effort, money, capability, get it out the door thing. Like anybody here who's ever worked in retail, you will be never ever having this conversation. Jake, I don't think we should let the ad out because it's not perfect. It's not like exactly how I envisaged it could be. No, you got to go, this is good enough. We got to get it out. Why? Because you got to sell stuff.
Yeah.
And so this is why we what we're hearing a lot is in the realm of creativity and AI. We're hearing from the perfectionists how it could be this, superb little, piece of perfection worthy of Rembrandt, worthy of Beethoven. No, we're selling stuff. And what we want is good enough stuff within the realm of budget, time, get it out the door, pressures from the boss, internal politics, my own persuasion capability, and so on.
Right.
And can AI do that? Bloody hell, it actually can. And will there be whole ramifications that we couldn't possibly kind of work from that? Yes, there will. And there's one key thing I think is going to be, we're going to have more capabilities within ourselves. So instead of things being totally siloed where Jake does the box at the end of the production line, we might be able to control the whole production line. We might be able to do it all that. And when this has happened before, when social media took off around 2006 onwards and AdWords and SEO, what happened? It didn't torch a load of jobs. It created a whole new set of jobs. There was no such thing as an SEO person in 2005. There was no such thing as a Facebook advertising person in 2012. Now there's an industry. And this will create new roles that we don't know about yet. And I'm like, cool, go for it, because I can't stop it. So go for it. And by the way, I'm a hypocrite here. I want to my level of hypocrisy here.
Yeah, he
Okay.
is.
Yeah. And so around 2014, 2015. And so I've always been a marketing person, and I pride myself on my openness to ideas and thoughts. And I
Yeah.
also pride on, being well educated and not reading, and all the rest of it. But still, in it must have been 2014, 2015, I'm looking at these guys running these Facebook advertising agencies, and I'm like, who would want to run a Facebook advertising agency purely for travel? Now, I was working in an airline, and I was like, that's so, I can't imagine. Oh, that's shocking, Then this particular company I kept an eye on was maybe a 5 or 10 man agency. And I was like, oh, that's so flaky, Facebook advertising, blah, 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 Then I read that they were sold for 5 million a year later, 3 years after starting up, I'm like, oh, what was getting in my way here? Ego and status. Ego and status. And if you can get rid of your ego and status, and don't be an idiot like me, you can go and set up a Facebook advertising agent. You can go and set up a AI ad agency, because the opportunity, the window is opening. In other words, don't be like Colin and have ego and status tied in with something. If you want to earn money, open up something and take advantage of this window that has just opened up.
And I love your good enough kind of structure. I just finished a book about parenting called Good Enough Parenting. And it came out in the 50s, 60s, but
Wow.
it was like, people are so freaked out, particularly around parenting. I mean, like, I am in charge of either messing this kid up forever,
Yeah.
or setting him up to be Tiger Woods, Beyonce, kind of like genius
Yeah.
Mozart clone, like, wow.
Yeah.
And if I do one thing this way or that way, it could totally tip the scales. It's a complete disaster, all of these things. But this book was it was about getting to good enough. And they were very clear about saying, I'm not saying like, that's good enough, like, sure, there's 3 wheels on the car, but more than 2, we're good. Not that at all. But I think what you were saying is get rid of your ego. And it made me think of approach, craft, discernment. Maybe you need to also dissociate your ego from those things. Because I think a lot of people, it might not be an ego thing, but I just have a level of taste or style or craft or discernment that gets me to this highfalutin thing. And you have to really question it and say, what are the parameters? How can we get good enough? And then how can we ship it? And that's why I think me and you really connect on this jazz thing, because you're ready, you're not, it doesn't matter, because we're going.
Because we're better play. Yeah. It's 1, 2, 3, 4, go. Yeah?
Right. And so you're like, bah! And you get a chance every bar to do something cool, to do something different, to take a pause, actually don't play anything. There's a Jerry Mulligan, the concert jazz band, and then I'll release Colin back into the wild, but there's a concert jazz band that he created, where it was just a kind of a light orchestra. But there's a scene, there's a part in one of these songs, and they're just cooking. Like, it's insane. And Zoot Sims is on tenor. Jerry Mulligan is playing Barry, and then Bob Brookmeyer's playing valve trombone, which is like, trombone's hard because you got to slide that thing around, but valve trombone, boy, they can start cooking. So they're trading 4s, which is I'll take 4 bars and then I'll pass it to you, and you do a solo for 4 bars, and then we'll pass it to the drummer. They'll take a little thing and then pass it back to us. It's one of the most enjoyable things to be a performer doing these things. And when the audience can start tracking and they're looking back and forth, it's just such a joyful thing. But Jerry Mulligan, in one of the things, it's just like lines, fat lines, huge, everything's filled. And then here's the next player, everything's filled. And then it comes to Jerry Mulligan and he plays, he's like, da-ba-da-ba-da. And then he just stops for like a bar and a half, which is forever. And then he just does this crazy line to get out of it. But it was like this amazing thing. Like you don't have to fill it up. You can actually peace out and like let it breathe a little bit. But like that's artistry, that's craftsmanship, and that's stuff that AI can get you towards, but you gotta be able to open your mind, not get worried about, the doom and gloom, but see it as a place for you to create comparative advantage, learn how you innovate, find what excites you. I think, the last time we talked, you said we're in a really awesome time in marketing, and it feels like that feeling hasn't changed. It's still a really great time to be here.
It's still the best ever. The only potential benefit of being slightly older than many members of your audience is I can remember pre-internet in marketing terms in the mid-90s.
Right.
And we had much fewer opportunities. We'd much fewer chances to express ourselves. Now a 25-year-old or a 21-year-old, or I'm sorry, what am I saying? Any age can get on YouTube and create their own video. It is the ultimate democratization. And I'd leave your listeners on this thing. It still is the greatest time ever to work in marketing. We have democratized the tools down to the nth degree due to these user interface moments that we just talked about. Now this AI is a thing that I don't need any money for. I can be up on my Shopify site up in 30 minutes. I can be, using Google AdWords. I can do anything. And even if you want to learn jazz, you can go on and learn improvisation on YouTube. 20 years ago when I was trying to learn it, it was like this absolutely horrendous experience of using tape recorders and writing things down.
Yes.
It's brutal. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so there's no doom and gloom. It's the greatest time ever. It's the ultimate in democratization. Jake, if you wanted to get, do something in his hometown 30 years ago, you'd had to get a loan from the bank. He'd had to get the loan for the bank. Then he has to get the loan for the bank to get the 20-year lease for the store. Then he's got to fill the store. It takes a year. He has a legal agreement. He has to hire staff, and he's in the hole for $300,000, and he still hasn't sold anything. Right now, it's we're at the top of the hour recording. We can be up and selling in 30 minutes.
It's insane. Well, it's I guess really it's yours to mess up.
It's yours to learn and have fun with.
That's what I meant.
It's like we can have the Jake Sanders merch store up in 30 minutes, and know if anybody wants it. Now, I'll give you the tip. I don't think anybody wants it, but imagine they do.
Ow! Oh, there's a knife in my back. He just said really nice things, but then he brought me right back down to earth. That's jazz for you, baby. We could talk forever, but we're gonna have to wrap it up. I want you to tell people how they can connect and learn more about you online, Colin.
Well, just find me on LinkedIn under Colin Lewis. Find me on Twitter under @Colin A. Lewis, as an A for aardvark, Colin A. Lewis. And if you can, follow me on LinkedIn, because I'm playing. The things I'm talking to you about are things I'm learning as I think. So my stuff on LinkedIn and my stuff on Twitter is stuff I'm learning on the go. It's not this sort of like, hey, listen to me because I'm a great person. Although I do that the odd time because that's a lot of fun as well.
It's pretty good.
But do follow me and get in touch. And I hope you really enjoy this. It's been fantastic fun, Jake, to talk about a lot of crazy stuff together. But honestly, my final point is to everybody, it really is the best time ever to work in marketing. It really is the best opportunity. And the only thing that is stopping you is your imagination.
What Gets Measured is a NinjaCat podcast. Please rate and review the show wherever you find your podcasts. Share this episode on social, and visit us on the web at ninjacat.io.